I've been doing a series of walks for newcomers to Oxford, students and anybody else interested. And in one of them, I walked from Worcester College to Hythe Street and then up the Canal as far as a district called Jericho, and then through Jericho back to Walton Street and then back to Worcester. And the point at which I entered Jericho was here. That's St Barnabas Church, and the buildings on the canal side itself are part of a still functioning boatyard. I say still functioning in contrast with some derelict land further down the canal, which was a boatyard, I believe, but is not functioning anymore. And if you watch the Worcester College to Canal to Jericho video, then you will know how to get here. This is the bridge just ahead of me at which I turned off the canal. And what I'm going to do today is to start from here and do one of my favourite pub walks. I'm going to go to a pub called the Plough in a village north of here, village at the top of Port Meadow for those people who know it. And the village is Wolvercote. Oxford has incorporated some villages, such as Wolvercote. Others are just nearby. And each village has its own particular character. Wolvercote seems to be very community-minded. It puts on amateur dramatics, comedy shows in the summer, does a fish and chip supper, so you buy fish and chips and eat them in the village hall while watching comedy sketches, which is great fun. It has a big midsummer festival which includes a dog show called Scruffts for people who are from the UK. It's a pun on Scruffy and Crufts, the proper dog show, and quite a lot of other events. The Plough puts on things too from time to time, and it's a nice, perhaps somewhat old-fashioned family pub. Nicely kept beers and space for children to play next to the pub. So that's where I'm going to walk today. It's sunny, a bit breezy, and I'm afraid there may be a little bit of wind noise, so please bear with that. And narrow boating is popular on this canal, and I suspect that these boats belong to the boatyard and are hired out. Look at the names: Exeter, Brasenose, and I think I saw a Somerville somewhere, so these are all named after Oxford colleges. If I go up those steps and then round there, I enter Jericho, and in fact on the ground floor wall of there is an information page that tells you about Jericho and its history. There used to be an ironworks here on the right, where the big block of flats is now. An ironworks called Lucy. I think, in fact, when it first started in the late 19th century, it was called the Eagle Foundry or some such. Then it became known as Lucy after either one of the founders or one of the people who continued it. I'm not sure which. William Lucy, I think. And in recent years it's moved to property, at least as far as its Oxford business is concerned. And you will see a lot of houses and flats round here with signs asserting that they are run or owned by Lucys. Very nicely organised school of ducks there. Now, the canal, as I've remarked before, is essentially one-dimensional, so it's pretty easy to explore. There are some side routes leading off it, which are worth knowing, and this one goes up to Walton Well Road, and then on the left to Port Meadow. And you can walk across Port Meadow if it isn't too marshy or flooded to Wolvercote. On the right hand side of Port Meadow is a nature reserve called Burgess Field, and you should be able to walk that any day of the year, because it floods a lot less. It's higher, floods a lot less than Port Meadow itself. Or you can follow me and walk up the canal to Wolvercote. Going off on the right there, you go back to Walton Street and to a continuing road called Kingston Road, which goes up to North Oxford, converging with Summertown. And Summertown has a street of shops, one pub and quite a lot of cafes, and a French patisserie. And it makes a bit of a change from having your coffee in the centre of Oxford. Certainly changing colour. That's a magnificent sight. Now, I reckon this walk will probably take about half an hour, maybe a bit more. If you find that boring, although it is your own little dose of canned sunshine, then you can turn it on to double speed on YouTube, or just put it on a big screen in the background while you cut your toenails or fry your eggs or whatever you're doing. Cutting toenails while frying eggs isn't recommended because the oil tends to splash and you might burn your feet. And these are some residents, lucky residents, who have gardens going right down to the canal. And I'm fairly sure that Richard Dawkins, the biologist and campaigner for atheism, lived in one of these houses. There's one book in which he writes about willows raining information as clearly as if they were floppy disks, or as clearly as if they were raining floppy disks. He's talking about the information stored in the seeds. And I think somewhere around there he mentions the canal side. And I have to say, it's pleasantly quiet. You get the impression that a lot of people aren't yet back from the bank holiday weekend holidays. And with a gentle sun and a slight breeze, it's very close to the dictionary definition of idyllic. Even more so, I guess, if you sit there and trail your toes in the water, presumably after you've cut your toenails.
Yeah.
That is a recreation ground just south, attached to the south side of Aristotle Lane, and that must be the ice cream van that we just heard. I'm tempted, but I'm not sure that normal ice cream would go with the beers I'm going to have in the pub, and I don't think Walls do beer flavoured ice cream. A beer cornetto sprinkled with hops could be worth tasting. That's pretty.
I mean, yeah, it'd be nice just to be able to go and travel places, but I quite like having one set place to go to. Yeah. But no, I think it's good. My mum and my sister went to watch the Newcomers in London, a concert. Oh, yeah. They did, but yeah, it was really enjoyed it. And their Airbnb was like, they stayed in a condo. It was really cool, except the hatch on the door didn't lock, they're not outside. So it's a bit like, yeah. No, we didn't. They survived.
And that goes up to Aristotle Lane from this side. And it's nice that the trees are still in leaf enough to provide some decent tree tunnels along the path. Now there's a road, or to be more exact, because bits of it have different names, a series of roads paralleling the canal on the right, and then eventually it turns into the last such segment, Bainton Road, turns diagonally right and goes all the way to Woodstock Road, and you can then walk across horizontally, as it were, from Woodstock Road to Banbury Road, and you'll be near the start of the Summertown shopping area. It has a little Tesco and a little Sainsbury's. The patisserie, as I mentioned, other cafes, maybe a Farrow and Ball paint shop, I can't remember whether that's there. Charity shops, well, a charity shop in South Parade, which is at the end on the left, raising money for animal refuges, selling books and watches, amongst other things. These are the trap grounds, a nature reserve, quite wild, and that's worth exploring. I've done at least one video about it. If you search my channel for trap grounds, you'll find it. Hi.
35 minutes. Yeah.
That goes up to Frenchay Road. It's a continuation of an older Frenchay Road. This bit was built when some new housing estates were put on this side of the canal. And it continues round and to the right. And then joins up with the road that goes back onto the Summertown part of Woodstock Road. There is Somerville. Now, I said that Wolvercote is quite a community-minded village. One of the things it did during the summer was a fete, and there's a little bit of meadow close to the Plough, which you'll see, where they were making haystacks. And one of the things I did, you'll find this on video, twice in fact, was to
Oh dear.
Thanks very much. I hope I haven't spoilt it. Thank you.
Thank you. You wasn't torn. Ah.
Thanks. That's right. Wow. I got my skirt caught in a bramble because I was too busy thinking about what I was just talking about.
Right, that was
And that's the area I mean. If you go along the bridge, you can then start curving left and up a little hill, and you'll come to Woodstock Road. So I was talking about Wolvercote and its community spirit when I got my skirt caught in that bramble, and saying that I'd crawled through a haystack at least, twice actually. Once during the St Peter's Church fete and once on the day after. That's the sort of thing you do in Wolvercote. And as another example of this sort of promoted rurality, they have a festival called Apple Day in early October, generally somewhat time round about the 4th to the 7th. They have an orchard on the road that goes to the Trout, the famous tourist pub, not very far from the Trout itself. And the orchard has a large variety of apple trees. I think it's got at least 20 different types. The trees are equipped with labels that tell you what sort of apple it is, what it tastes like, and whether it's best used for cooking or cider making or turning into apple pies or whatever. And they also have competitions. And one of the competitions, I've never seen this done anywhere else, is the longest peel competition, where people have to compete to slice off the longest length of peel from an apple without breaking the peel, I mean. So that's Apple Day, and they generally serve some very nice apple juices too. So for anybody who is into all things apple, that's worth visiting. And indeed, I did a video that day last year where I walked along the canal to Apple Day and then walked back. This is St Edward's School, day school but predominantly boarding, I think, and it has large grounds on that side of the canal, and it's the only organisation that I will pass that considers it worth closing the lift bridge. So if you want to get to Summertown by crossing the bridge, you can't. Thank you, St Edward's.
But now they've built something around it and it's cordoned off.
I suppose that's the nearest thing that a narrowboat has to a patio. After all, you couldn't put the patio on the boat, I don't think. I thought for a moment that said Titanic, which it doesn't. I think it said Planet Panic. I've got Titanic on the brain because I had a beer in the Royal Blenheim on St Epps Street, and they take a lot of their beers from the Titanic brewery. I think it's in the Midlands, somewhere near Stoke. This probably is the end of the residential area. And now I'm getting to a sort of no man's land, the threshold space, you might say, between Summertown, North Oxford and Wolvercote. The canal bends round to the right slightly. There are some Wolvercote chimney tops. Now, I think this is the nicest stretch of the canal for some time now, because heading north you'll see a lot of new and rather ugly building on land that was either owned by the university for a long time or that they've recently bought and started building stuff on. And unfortunately they've polluted the the local views pretty badly with those buildings. And I'm going to come off here and go to the Plough. So that is the canal going south. That's the canal going north, and you can walk along it for a long way yet. I've done as far as Banbury. That's Port Meadow. That's where the haystacks I mentioned there, including the one that I crawled through, where I think they've all been moved. I don't know what you do to haystacks when you've finished with them, but whatever you do, it's been done. And that's the Plough's child-friendly meadow playing area. So it's a Green King pub, and they can be pretty restrictive, much more so than Titanic in the Royal Blenheim, for example, meaning that any pub tied to Green King will have to take their beers, and maybe not that much else. We'll see what the Plough's got at the moment. So I shall go in and ask whether I can video them, and I'll order myself something to drink. Well, this is my beer. It's a pint of Old Trip, which is from Green King. And again, for people from outside the UK or who aren't much experienced with British beer organisation, most, if not all, British pubs are what's called tied to a particular brewery, and that means that the brewery supplies management and supplies, and probably insists that you take a very good proportion of their beers. They may or may not allow you to have a guest beer. A guest beer is a beer that's brewed by some other brewery. And the reason this is important is that different breweries' beers vary widely in taste and quality. As ever, the bigger breweries tend to be less interesting than the smaller ones. Now, the brewery here, Green King, what this pub is tied to. I think it used to be tied to Morals, but when they closed, the property was transferred to Green King. And it only has 2 bitters on. So-called real ale drinkers like bitter in preference to lager because it's got a more sort of organic taste. The lager, Stella and so on, you get from the pumps you see in bars, tends to be very sort of single taste and rather sterile in feel, if you know what I mean. Bitter that is properly brewed and pumped doesn't do that. So it's of interest to beer drinkers to get a beer by a brewery that they trust, and it's a disappointment for variety of tastes when a pub only has 2 such bitters, which unfortunately the Plough does at the moment, and it doesn't have any guest beers. It doesn't have any beers that are not brewed by Green King. I did see a pump that wasn't advertising itself though, so maybe that's just temporary. Pump without a clip. However, so in that respect, the beer supply here is not as interesting today as it was at the Royal Blenheim, which I'll show you sometime, which had loads and loads of Titanic beers and beers from other breweries too. But that said, it's a very nice village pub. It has this informal play area. It's a nice building. There's a lot of dogs and kids and people mixing here. They take part in festivals, not only the Wolvercote festivals that I've mentioned, but one, for example, called the Big Lunch, where people from the community come together and share food. And I think Wolvercote does that more than a lot of other Oxford villages. So that's worth something, and the Plough takes part in that. And I'll just show the inside. They've said that I can video the pub. So those are the 2 hand pumps that I mentioned. The old Trip and another one from Green King, and one that doesn't have a pump clip, doesn't have a label at the moment, so it's not serving anything. And there's a menu. A restaurant area, though you can eat in the rest of the pub too. And this is rather splendid. It's a room done up as a library, often used for group meetings. So there's a very nice atmosphere here, and I'm not going to let the comparative lack of variety of the beer stop me doing these walks. So this is the Plough, and I've shown you 2 canal walks now, one that went from Worcester to the bridge into Jericho, and one that continued from that bridge to Wolvercote. And if you combine them, they make a very nice afternoon out on a day like this. See you next time.